De La Salle's letters addressed to the brothers have quite a different tone from those addressed to persons not belonging to the Institute. In the latter group, there is generally a great deal of formality. This more formal tone is illustrated in De La Salle's letter to his own brother, Canon Jean-Louis. On the other hand, all correspondence with the brothers begins without any formality at all, but in a familiar manner, with the words, "My very dear brother," occurring usually within the opening sentence. Similarly, these letters invariably close with "Tout à vous," which is rendered "totally yours." The body of each of these letters reads like a conversation, while letters to people outside of the Institute are often in a style almost impossible to translate into the more familiar style of contemporary times. De La Salle identifies himself completely with the brothers, abandoning all claims to the social status he possessed in a century and a society where such claims were rigorously maintained. From the letters, we learn scarcely anything about the difficulties that De La Salle personally experienced, or the opposition that dogged him throughout his life. His correspondence with Gabriel Drolin is the only exception to this pattern, for De La Salle liked to keep his disciple in Rome aware of what was happening to the Institute in France. But even in these letters, references to himself and his problems are few. The violence of the writing masters and the masters of the little schools, their physical attacks on the schools, the court cases they brought against De La Salle, the fines imposed, and the prohibition against teaching in Paris are but obliquely mentioned. Brother Nicolas Voyart's betrayal of his responsibility and of the confidence placed in him as director of the training school for rural teachers is only indirectly mentioned in a reply to Drolin's complaint about what Drolin considers to be De La Salle's lack of confidence in him. De La Salle's replies to the brothers are direct and precise. They give the impression that De La Salle had his correspondence letters in front of him as he wrote his reply, point by point, with here a word of encouragement, there a reprimand, now a little irony, but mostly with advice for living in community and the management of classes. He makes no attempt to use the polished phrase. The replies seem to be those of a man with more work to do than he really has time for, a man in a hurry. To many readers, it might appear that De La Salle spends too much time dealing with trivialities, insisting on minor points of the rule, like sounding the bell, the correct number of times for the various spiritual exercises. But we have to take into consideration that the brothers of those days were all beginners in religious life. None of them had experience in this kind of lifestyle. There were no established traditions for them to follow. They were often living in houses in groups of 2 or 3 without the support of a community of experienced men. The original local superiors were men who had been members of the society for only a few years. De La Salle was not only the superior of the Society of Brothers, he was also, at their own insistence, their spiritual director and confessor. Thus, in several of his letters, we find him readily giving encouragement and help to brothers with troubled consciences. He won a reputation outside his new community, too, as a spiritual director, and people were recommended to his guidance. Often he found himself asked to direct men and women in their search for greater spiritual progress in their lives. It is interesting to note that the letters he wrote to these persons outside the Institute of the Brothers are much more detailed and more filled with spiritual guidance than the majority of those written to the brothers themselves. At least this is certainly the case of those letters that have come down to us from Canon Blaine, one of De La Salle's first biographers. In addition to the letters to the brothers and to others who sought his guidance, this volume contains one letter De La Salle wrote to refute the claim that he was one of those who had appealed against the papal bull Unigenitus, a document which condemned as unorthodox certain statements of opinion drawn from the moral reflections of Quesnel. There is also a strongly worded letter, written very probably to his nephew, Canon Jean-François Maillefer, who had appealed to the civil courts against a decision handed down by the bishop in a matter of ecclesiastical discipline. Jean-François was the brother of François Elie, another early biographer of De La Salle. In these two letters, De La Salle clearly manifested his position of adherence to the teaching authority of the Church, especially as embodied in the authoritative decrees of the Pope.